Waterfall, the CCW podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Waterfall, the water saving podcast, here to give you tips on how to use water wisely, save it in the home, save it at work and do all of those other good things, probably save yourself some money at the same time. I am Kath and I am here today with Karen.
Hello, Kath.
Hello.
And we're here with Tom as well.
Hi Karen, hi Kath, hi everyone listening.
So, we've got a really genuinely interesting episode to get into today, all about rainwater harvesting, which is kind of all of the good things that we like to talk about on Waterfall. But before we do that, following on from an earlier episode of Waterfall, there's been an interesting piece of news going on about somebody doing a very lengthy run, 848 kilometre run, which is the length of the River Seine in France. Seine? I'm not sure. I'm probably being very, very British there.
Yes, someone has ran it, Kath. Someone has ran the very river that we were speaking about a few weeks ago with Dan Angelescu of Fluidian. And of course, if you listen to this episode in real time, the Paris Olympics are happening right now. And we spoke to Dan about his water intelligence company and how they were checking the quality of the water. And it's interesting to see this run as well, Kath, just sort of, highlighting again the many issues that are faced over in that fair capital.
Yeah, and what did Dan say? Seine or Seine?
I think he said Seine, I think so, but I think it's all right,
I'm certainly not going to be in the running for competing with any French accents, so...
You're a cultured and knowledgeable individual. However you say it is how I'm going to say it from here on in.
It's been really interesting because in that episode when we were talking to Dan, he was, making the point, quite rightly, that most modern capital cities do have exactly the same issues to contend with. So, it's really worth a listen to that episode.
So, before we get into the episode, couple of things. Don't forget to email us if you've got interesting questions or things that you think we should cover. We are at podcast@ccw.org.uk and you can look us up on all of your normal social media things at CCW Voice. CCW standing, of course, for Consumer Council for Water. That's us, representing all consumers in England and Wales. Anyway, as our largest host, Mike would say, bring on the guests.
This podcast is brought to you by CCW, the voice for water consumers.
Right, it's a great pleasure to welcome Lisa Craven, who is MD of Stormsaver, to Waterfall. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, we've just been talking off air that I would say that Stormsaver sounds like it's double glazing, but you confirmed that it wasn't. Just tell us a little bit about Stormsaver, who you are, what you do.
Definitely not double glazing. So we've been going for over 21 years now. We're a water reuse specialist. So that encompasses rainwater harvesting, grey water recycling, active attenuation. So basically anything that's reusing water rather than mains water. Based in Newark in Nottinghamshire. We've got about 42 people now, so that makes us the biggest company in the UK. We have a lot of fun. We enjoy what we're doing. Mission is to save water. So that's a bit about what we're about.
Oh, brilliant. That's right up our street. I could see Karen's face lit up in delight when you were talking about your mission is to save water.
That's right.
In the UK, rainwater harvesting isn't massively common, really, on a kind of large scale or a household scale, although Karen will start banging on about a water butt any minute now. But what is rainwater harvesting?
In a nutshell, it is collecting rainfall from the roof area of your building. We take it down the normal guttering that you would normally have on your home. But rather than it going to the storm drain, we divert it to a tank, normally underground, where we store it. And then we filter that so that we can use it back in the home for things like toilet flushing, laundry applications, washing your car, watering your garden, all the things that you really don't need to be using mains water for.
And that's really interesting to hear because we've had previous podcast episodes where we have explored how the plants actually prefer rainwater to the tap water that you normally use. So, it's a win-win there in that respect, isn't it?
Yeah, they do, definitely. I mean, out in the normal sort of, Mother Earth isn't putting, all sorts of chlorines and things in her rain for the plants. So yes, that's what they're used to. That's what they prefer. And there are other benefits as well. Laundry, for example, rainwater is naturally soft. And so actually you can use half the amount of detergent that you would do in mains water. So, there's lots of other benefits that, from using it.
I did not know that about the detergent, less detergents you're using.
Yeah, definitely. It's there's lots of other things with rainwater harvesting that, added benefits from it that aren't just about that kind of saving water bit, which I shall tell you all about as we carry on.
So if you've got a rainwater harvesting system in place, is there a filtering and stuff that's done to it, done to a different standard if it's being used for, say, you're doing your laundry, or if it's used for flushing your toilet? How does that work?
I think there's we start with a misconception of what rainwater is actually like. I think lots of people envisage a muddy puddle because that's our experience of it, isn't it? Jumping around in muddy puddles. And rainwater isn't that. Rainwater is clean and clear. It falls from the sky, clean and clear, and all it does is it picks up very briefly some contaminants in the water from the roof on the way down, and they are really easy to filter out. So you're talking litter, which doesn't contaminate water. You just need to take it out to make sure it doesn't get in the tank. Leaves, which can break down, so you've got to make sure that actually you're taking out some fine sediment later on in the filtration process. And the only other one is bird feces. And so actually but the risk of that is actually quite low. So all you need to do is filter it, and it should be clean and clear. And actually, for the purposes that you're using it for, nothing should come through that changes your experience of that water. The only thing we would do is if you were using water in a place like a care home or a school or a hospital where you've got occupants that are particularly vulnerable, we would then recommend UV disinfection on that. But other than that, you can just filter it 2 or 3 times with the filtration system we've got in place, and it's good to go.
So what would you get? A tank, some filtration, and a bit of pumping? Is that all you need? What other components do you need?
So you've got a tank in the ground. Like I say, using your normal guttering, so nothing extra there. You'd want sealed gullies, because obviously you don't want people pouring things down the drain. Like, you just mop the floor and you pour it down the drain, and that goes into your water system. You don't want that. So sealed gullies. And yeah, you've got a tank underground, you store it underground, we filter it before it gets into the tank with a pre-tank filter. And then once you're in the tank, you've got a pump, and on the pump we have a second stage of filtration, and that floats just below the surface of the water, because you've got a fine sediment that is on the top, like your dust and pollen and things like that. Then you've got your heavy sediment from leaves and things that sinks to the bottom, and so the cleanest part of the tank is just below the surface. So we suck water through the pump from that point, goes through a second stage of filtration, and that then goes to a control panel that's within the building. And that then actually controls where that water's sent, making sure that your pump is used efficiently so it doesn't burn out, and it sends the water to points of use. That's if you have an individual system in your home. However, what the industry is moving towards is a communal system. So when we're working with housing developers on large sites, we'll be asking them to put in, rather than lots of individual tanks in the home, one large tank. And then that will go to a plant room, which will house all of the equipment that you need, but on a much bigger commercial scale, so that nothing is in the home of the homeowner. And the reason that's quite important is because then the homeowner doesn't have to do all of the maintenance on it. That can be done by professionals outside of the home.
And is that usually the arrangement that's put in place? Is it the developer that arranges that for that to happen? Or
yes. So what's happening at the moment is, I've been in industry for a couple of decades, and have watched it change. And the changes we've seen in the rainwater harvesting market over the last 18 months have been significant. And so in the past, most homes that had rainwater harvesting would be on an individual basis. What the industry is moving towards is working together with people like DEFRA, the Future Homes Hub, all of the DWI, RAS, all of the people that are involved in the water industry and the water companies. And we are moving towards, with the developers, communal scale systems. So in the future, you should be seeing housing developments that are built with these systems that are shared systems, but on a much larger scale.
What sort of savings would you typically get then if you had a rainwater harvesting system in place in your home?
So in the home, rainwater harvesting can provide probably around sort of 45 to 50% of the water in the home. And normally they're fairly efficient in terms of, for example, if you have a large roof area, you can collect a lot more rain. But actually, if you're not using that much rain, you're going to end up with a tank that's really, really full and it's not being used. But by the same token, if you have a block of flats, for example, which is very, very tall, lots of occupants, a high water demand, but a really small roof area, you don't want a massive tank just because you've got a lot of people, because it's never going to fill up because you haven't got the rainfall to collect from it. So when we size systems, we need to make sure that they're sized appropriately to be efficient. And if a system is sized efficiently, then we would be expecting to see around a 45 to 50% reduction in your non-potable supply. So everything that's not drinking.
Wow, that's pretty sizable, chunky savings there.
It is.
Are rainwater harvesting systems mainly on new builds then?
Yes. So it is much more complex to retrofit to an existing building. And that's because you've got to run dual pipe work. You can't run rainwater in the same pipe work that your mains water is in. You've got to keep them separate so you don't contaminate the mains water supply. Obviously, in an existing building, that's much harder to do. So it's much better to do this at the new build stage, which is why we want legislation to come in to say that you need to build these homes so that they're capable of having a rainwater harvesting system fitted at a later stage, even if you're not doing it at the new build stage.
And what's the appetite amongst developers for putting these systems in place? I mean, we hear about areas like around Cambridge where there's a real demand for new housing to be built, but of course, one of the driest parts of the country. This feels like the sort of thing that would intuitively be the right thing to do.
Yeah, so Cambridge, is one of the new water neutral areas, and actually building there now is going to be a real challenge if you can't offset the amount of water that you're going to be consuming in that building that you're building. So, it's going to be really important. Another thing we're seeing is, data centers are popping up everywhere, and we need that as, sort of homeowners. We want to have good data connections, but they take a considerable amount of water. And in dry periods, they are taking water away from the homeowner effectively, who's having restrictions on what they're using. So we need to have a balance with what we're building to make sure we do that. And there's various things we can do with water fittings, and making sure that we're using efficient water fittings, but that's only a piece of the puzzle. It just seems absolutely nonsensical to have all the rain that we do in this country and to not harness that locally and reuse it instead of mains water, when we know we're going to have 5,000 megalitres a day less than what we need by 2050. I don't think really the consumer, perhaps that's too big for a consumer to really understand and recognise, but that's a significant amount of water. And so if we don't make changes now, we're going to end up with a real problem, and developers and water companies recognise that. So we're actually seeing, going back to your original question, a real appetite from developers to start doing this. In fact, I think they're ahead of the game. They're ahead of legislation at the moment in some ways, because they want to do pilot projects, they want to install this, but to do it properly, we have to make sure that all of the guidance and legislation is in place, so that we don't have lots of people flooding the market and doing a really poor job. We've got to make sure we do it professionally. So,
what I'm interested in that last comment there about the guidance and legislation. Is this to stop rogue traders doing this kind of thing? What is it? Is that what you mean?
Well, so there's a couple of strands to it, really. First of all, rainwater harvesting isn't mandatory. Any sort of water reuse isn't mandatory in the UK, which it is in other countries. And so,
do you think it should be? Sorry for interrupting. Do you think it should be mandatory?
Absolutely. There is no way we will get to 2050 and have enough water for our needs if we don't do it. And I think that it's absolutely ludicrous to be using, if I gave you a big bottle of drinking water that cost you £2.50, would you use it to flush a toilet?
Oh yeah, I do that all the time. Very, very opulent. No, of course it is ridiculous, isn't it? So you say mandatory for new builds, right? Is that?
I think yes.
Yeah.
It should be mandatory for new builds over a certain size, because it's not always feasible. Certainly for commercial new builds, I think it definitely should be, and for housing developments over a certain size, I think it should be. And I think that we are moving towards that. We definitely are moving towards that. But in order to do it, and in order to do it safely and protect the industry's reputation, but also developers' reputations, we've got some work to do first. We already have a British standard for rainwater harvesting and grey water recycling, so that's already in place. There's various RAS guidelines to say about making sure we're not cross-contaminating things, so that's already in place. There's some work to do around wholesome and non-wholesome water definitions. And that is a major barrier to water reuse. So at the moment, the water fittings regulations say that water companies cannot supply non-wholesome water to properties. They have to provide wholesome, which is drinking water, to properties. And the applications, they say, that have to do that include toilet flushing. So they qualify that as a domestic use, and that means that really, if you read the fine print, it means that water companies can't adopt the tanks, which means they can't look after the tanks and maintain the system on behalf of the homeowner. So we need to change that legislation so that water companies can do that. Then water companies can look after it, or estate management, NAVs could look after it. There's various different ways we could do it, but we've got to address that. And we've just got to make sure that, we do it safely, so that, people understand that there are certain standards, that people consider maintenance. Maintenance is a really key part to the success of this. So we're finding a fine balance at the moment between pushing it through because we need to, because if we're too slow, we're going to be in real trouble, but not running before we can walk. So we make sure that everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet.
Enjoying the show? Please consider leaving a 5-star rating on iTunes and Spotify.
You can really see the potential for this with commercial buildings, perhaps warehouses with much larger roof areas, etc. Are you seeing an appetite amongst the sort of, the business community for adopting these sorts of measures?
Yes, so that's where the business is at the moment. We've installed over 2,000 commercial systems. All of the big sheds and distribution centres you see along the motorways and things, we do all of those. So there is much more appetite, and always has been over the years, in the commercial sector. It's the residential sector that's lagging behind. That's the sector where we haven't got the impetus to do it. But the commercial sector, and again, you're looking at bigger savings there. Some of our sites are saving sort of in the 90% of their water use. You'd expect to see at least a 75% saving in a commercial situation. Yeah. So it's because you've got bigger roof areas and you've got higher water demands and higher costs. The problem comes where people just do a tick box exercise. So, for example, we do have some sites, these large sites you see along the side of the motorway, that have got huge roof areas. And just put in a tiny 5,000 litre tank just to tick a box, when they could harness a huge amount of water, which would certainly be much more socially responsible to do that, but costs them more. So I do think that if we're moving towards that, we've got to somehow legislate to make sure that people are actually not just ticking a box, that there's not loopholes where they can get out of it by doing that. But no, there's a real appetite in the industry, and that's growing year on year, which is really positive.
So I'm interested in that comment you made about the most of your work is with business customers. So at the moment, how many households, and give us a feeling for how many households would have this kind of stuff fitted at the moment?
Households, crikey, there must be probably around 10,000, and it's difficult to know because no one collects industry figures on behalf of our industry. But the last ones that were collected by, because there's a UK Rainwater Management Association, the last figures were done a long time ago, but they thought there was probably 10 to 12,000 rainwater harvesting systems installed in the UK at that time. So I would say we're probably at least 3x, 4x that now, but that would include commercial as well.
So loads of potential then for expansion into households.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I mean, any building can have rainwater harvesting. It's just whether it's efficient or not.
So right now there'll be people listening to this going, yeah, all right. What happens when it doesn't rain, eh? So what happens if it doesn't rain? Is that a reality that people will run out? And then what happens there? Is there a fail-safe bypass or something that would use?
Yeah. So you, as a homeowner, you won't notice a difference. So we have a automatic mains water top up. So when the tank gets down to 10%, obviously we don't want to be sucking all the bits out the bottom of the tank that have settled down there. So we will kick in the mains water back up automatically when the water gets low. There's things that we can do so utilize attenuation systems as well. So actually then you've got you can use more water, so your likelihood of running out is less. And that's quite clever technology. So what that does is, so for those listeners that don't know, so attenuation system will go in to help prevent flooding. So it holds back in a massive great tank all of the water, so it doesn't hit the storm drain and cause flooding further downstream. So you always want that tank to be empty, because when it rains and you've got a massive storm, you need that to be empty so it can fill up full capacity. When we utilise that tank with rainwater harvesting, we want the tank to be full because we want to be using that rainwater. And so we use technology that talks to the Met Office every sort of 7 minutes or so to get information on what's happening with the weather. And the system will detect if there's a rainstorm coming in, and it will decide, depending on the intensity of the rainstorm, on how far away it is, what safe level it's going to need in the tank. So let's say your tank is 80% full of rainwater, and the system says, well, we're going to need 60% for this rainstorm. It will very slowly start to let out the water. It won't just dump it all at once, because we know what the weather's like. It could change its mind and go elsewhere. So it will just gradually start to let it out. And as the likelihood of that rainstorm hitting that building becomes higher, it will continue to let more water out until you've got that safe capacity. And then the rain will continue to fill up, so your tank is full again, but you still haven't flooded downstream. So these are technologies that are coming more and more as the industry is developing, and we'll see those on both residential and commercial sites going forwards.
We spoke about smart water butts in a previous episode, which kind of do the same sort of thing. This is just this sort of just a bigger scale, right?
It's just a big water butt, a cleverer water butt. And in some ways, that's what you want, your listeners to sort of understand, really, is that, actually rainwater harvesting is relatively simple. It is just a water butt. But what we do is that actually how you manage that water, the signals that you send to control that water, that's the clever bit. That's what makes it no longer a water butt.
I think for me, one of the things that I think is very clever about this is not only this fantastic technology that can interact with the Met Office and all the rest of it, but the fact that it works with the water cycle. So you're actually, capturing the water while it's around and using it, when there's less water available, so it's really working with a natural process, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And the whole idea really is that if you think about, if we could implement water reuse, localized water reuse on a mass scale with all of our new buildings, what you're doing is in those dry periods, or rather in the wet periods when you've got rain and your water's full and you're using your rainwater all the time, you're not using mains water. That mains water is keeping the reservoirs topped up. so that when you've got periods of drought, then you've got that reserve there. And that's what's not happening at the moment, is that there's no reserve in periods of drought. And actually for, for the UK, we always think we're a very rainy country, and actually we really have been. This winter it's been extremely wet, but then you hear people saying, oh, but we're in drought, and people can't quite believe it. So actually in the UK, we're actually really water stressed. There are some areas that have got less water than parts of Africa, and yet we think that we're a country that, is very water rich. And that is why I think people actually behave quite badly with water, and have got some really poor habits in terms of how they use water in the home, how they use water at work. And we really need to change that. And I think that one of the great things about water reuse, and another benefit it brings, is that, if you've got somebody that is, not using dual flush properly on their toilet, for instance, mine, which is really annoying because actually it's tiny like that. And, you can't press one from the other anyway, because, you end up pressing them both. So, which incidentally, there is going to be some
This
changes.
is a recurring theme, Lisa, on
Yeah.
Waterfall, the big flush, the little flush button being totally baffling.
Oh, it's terrible. There is going to be a change coming. So the Future Homes Hub has recommended that in future we make sure that, I think the small flush button, for the water saving button, is 150% larger than the other one. So they're going to put that in building regs. So that is progress. But if you've got somebody in the home or a family that, are wasting water and not using it wisely, surely it's better that they're wasting reused water than mains water. So you could have some child flushing the toilet like that constantly. It's not going to drain your mains water if it's provided by recycled water. And so if we can't get consumers to change their habits, which over the last 20 years we've really not made progress on at all, then let's mitigate that by making sure they're not using valuable mains water.
Now, we have listeners in well over 50 countries now to Waterfall, and I suspect there'll be quite a few going, what is wrong with you people? Because they're familiar with this concept. Bermuda, for example, they're collecting rainwater from the roof. That's just what is done. Why do you think it's been so slow to take off here?
I think that generally in the UK, we don't do anything unless we have to, and we haven't legislated for it. And the housing developers are under huge pressure, huge cost pressures with things. Land is very, valuable. They want to build as much as they can on land. They're having to, meet so many sustainability standards that they didn't before. And I think that, the government have tried to not put additional pressure on them. And I think the water is kind of the black sheep of the environmental family. It's 10, 15 years behind energy, whereas actually we should be doing joined up thinking with energy and water together. But you see so much about CO2, emissions, energy use. And again, for the consumer, it wasn't really until the bills for energy went sky high, sort of last year and the year before, that then people really did start to minimise what they're using energy on. And water in this country is cheap, very cheap. When you think about how much you pay, sort of £2.50 for a metre squared of water, that's really cheap. When, again, you think about a bottle of water, 2-litre bottle from the shops is about the same. So until we see any price rises in water, until we value water more, until the government pull the finger out and actually start prioritising water in the same way they prioritise energy, I honestly don't think we're going to see much progress. And I think that's why we haven't. Other countries have recognised that, and they've steamed ahead with water. And sadly in the UK, I think we're lagging behind a bit. But we've got a good group of people, in the industry. We are trying to catch up. Defra are working really hard to try and bring us in line with energy. There's people like Waterwise, they do some fantastic work, right across the water industry, trying to advocate for new legislation and better behaviours. So there's a lot of good stuff going on.
If you're a punter then going, I quite fancy one of these rainwater harvesting systems, where should they go for help to find out more? Where's a good trusted source of information?
Well, to be honest, there's some good suppliers out there. Obviously, Stormsaver being one of them. And actually, you probably are best, if you want information, to go to supplier websites, just Google it and see who you can find. There's the UK Rainwater Management Association. So, you want to be using somebody that is a member of that to make sure that they conform to the British standards. So you're getting, you're not getting some cowboys in and doing it. And my number one recommendation would be, don't buy different parts from different people. It's a classic example we see, developers thinking, oh, well, it's just a pump and a tank. I can buy a pump and a tank, and then I'll just, design a little control panel to sort it all out. And it's always a disaster. So just always buy everything from one supplier. Then it's warranted. Then, you're not going to one supplier saying, well, it's not working. And the supplier saying, well, I only supplied your tank. I didn't supply that bit of it. So always buy it from one supplier, always buy somebody that has got accreditations and complies with the British standard. And if you want to know about water use and how to reduce it, then Waterwise website would be a great place to start.
What's your advice to people like Karen and me then? Because my house is 120 years old and Karen's mansion is even older. In terms of if we were interested in having a kind of rainwater system, what would you recommend?
So retrofitting to any building, like I said at the beginning, is really difficult. But if you're really passionate about it, there are things you can do. So for example, normally your drainage is all coming to 1 or 2 points on a home. And the majority of your water use that you could potentially use for recycled water is actually downstairs anyway. So actually, if you have a home where, let's say, you have a utility and your washing machine is in the utility, you've got a sink in the utility, and your downstairs loo is right next door or somewhere in the vicinity, you could actually put in a tank. It would probably need to be above ground because you've got certain drainage levels that are already set, and if you put a tank in, it kind of pushes that down. But you could have a large scale water butt, and you could supply just that little area, and you'd probably find that that's most of where your water use is anyway. So there's always ways of doing it. The other alternative is you can get garden only systems. So you can put a nice little flat tank in your back garden. And you can use that for washing your vehicles, watering your plants. Again, it's a water butt on a large scale, but with a pump really. So there are simple things you can do without completely destroying all of the plasterwork in your home.
I thought you were going to say you should just move house.
Well, you could do that. Well, I did a new build, a renovation a number of years ago now. And I also live in a very old home, so I don't have a rainwater harvesting system at the moment. But in one of my previous homes, I did have one of our little individual rainwater harvesting systems. And my water bill reduced from, it was about £800 a year to 90. It was so efficient. And we use laundry all the time, and we use it for our washing machine. And like I say, we used half the amount of detergent. It was absolutely brilliant, and I loved it. So I have actually put my money where my mouth is, and I can tell you now it's definitely worth doing.
Very good. Now we do have one very important question to ask, don't we, Karen? Talking of putting your money where your mouth is.
Yes, we do always ask our guests if they know what their individual household use is.
Yes, do you know, I saw that question and I thought, I don't know that. So I went searching this morning for some water calculators and discovered that there's quite a few in America, but a severe lack of water calculators in the UK. Nonetheless, I did find one, and I calculated, and I was rather shockingly, that my personal water use, it says, is 1,500 litres a day. But that's taken into account things like eating meat, all of the clothes, my shopping habits. So it's not just water use in the home. And then I did another one which told me it was 400 litres a day. So my answer to you is I have no idea. but it has inspired me to go and find out, and we've already got plans to see if we can do our own water calculator on our website to help people. So yeah, I've tried and I can't answer that honestly.
We've got one on our website, which you might find useful.
Oh, well, I should use that.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go to the CC Water website.
Yeah, I will do that. And then we could do a second podcast and I'll tell you. I'll tell you what it was. So, but no, I mean, we try to be really water conscious at home. I always I've got a condensing tumble dryer. I always pour the water out of that into a watering can to water my plants. You know, and again, you know, nagging my children, get out the shower. So we always try to do our best. So
very good. I mean, it's quite frightening, isn't it, when you get a figure that includes the embedded water? So your first calculator that had all your water and your stuff you buy as well, and it is phenomenal because that water is essentially outsourced often to other countries as well, and often those countries are really dry countries. So it's like, wow, there's a hidden water use. So I mean, it's quite interesting there quoting that 1,500 figure, because I know our eyebrows went, whoa.
Yeah, I know. Well, this is what scared me as well. I thought, well, that's taking into, as I was answering the questions, I was thinking, crikey, that's taking into account an awful lot of things that I hadn't really even considered. And I'm in the industry. So yeah, so hopefully, you know, people will use your water calculator on your website and it will open their eyes more. And again, you know, I went to Mozambique with WaterAid back in 2015, and you know, families were surviving on 2 litres per person per day. So, you know, if you know, you think about how lucky we are that we have the availability that we do, really.
No, absolutely. Lisa, this has been absolutely fascinating finding out about rainwater harvesting. It's been really illuminating, and it will be interesting to see how this all progresses over the next few years, because I think we were certainly nodding along when you were saying that you know, we need to change the way we think about this stuff. We need to make sure it's more embedded in the standards when we build new houses, because if we don't, we're going to be in a tricky position. Lisa, thank you so much for joining Waterfall.
You're very welcome. Thank you for asking me.
What would you like Waterfall to cover next? Send your water-saving topics to podcast@ccwater.org.uk.
Well, wasn't that interesting? I think that raised some really good examples of where particularly business customers can really tap into the natural resources that are falling out of the sky. You know, it seems an incredibly easy way to potentially make some really significant savings.
Absolutely. I mean, when Lisa was talking there about, even at home, 45 to 50% saving your water in the home. And yeah, with businesses, bigger roofs, far more to go out there. I don't know about you, Karen, but as Lisa was talking, I started thinking to myself, woo, maybe this is something I could get into my house. But then she did say it's difficult to retrofit. So now I'll ponder on how I can perhaps fit it downstairs on a smaller scale.
Well, I suppose I'm still wedded to my water butt, and that's really sort of, I suppose, the sort of household version of this sort of thing, isn't it? You know. But no, as I say, and it was really interesting to hear how invested she is in this area of work, you know, and obviously, you know, is likely to go from strength to strength.
Absolutely. Already the biggest company in the UK, and it's the future, isn't it? We do, as we touched on there in the episode, genuinely need to start reusing some of our water, because we do need to save water. We need to reduce our consumption, save it, use it wisely, as I think every Waterfall listener knows. So, last but not least, do look us up on all of your social media. You can find us at CCW Voice across all social media platforms. And of course, do send us your questions, episode ideas, feedback. We genuinely love to hear from you. You can email us at podcast@ccwater.org.uk. Bye, everyone.